Welcome, smart humans, to Waves of Wisdom, summer conversations with smart minds. Because this summer, I invite you on an inspiring and transformative journey as I explore the minds and lives of extraordinary smart humans. I'm, of course, your host of the Managing the Smart Mind podcast, Elsa Kramer, also known as Coach Kramer. And throughout this scintillating summer series, we're going to be riding the waves of the inspiring lives of lots of very different people with bright brains. In each interview, I have the privilege of engaging in captivating conversations with amazing smart humans, from poets to startup founders, from artists to entrepreneurs, and from stand-up comedians to swamis. This summer, we'll be delving into the depths of their wisdom, and we're going to draw lots of inspiration from their unique perspectives, their choices, and experiences. Waves of Wisdom is not just about high IQ or being fast-brained. It's about how to harness your intelligence and your heart to make a meaningful impact. You're going to learn about strategies, tools, and shifts these smart minds have employed to navigate the complexity of being a fast-brained human on this crazy planet. We're going to explore all the ways in which you too can design a life that works with your smart mind. Whether you have a well or not so well managed smart mind, this summer series of Waves of Wisdom will help guide you on your quest for knowledge, inspiration, and personal growth. Enjoy. This is episode 86, How Dan French Avoids Boredom. Hello, smart humans. Allow me to introduce to you the multi-talented Dan French, professor in rhetoric, marketer, stand-up comedian, and converter of conservatives, and much, much more. Yep, you heard it right. Dr. Dan keeps pretty busy. He's a master rhetorician. He's the creator of the Rhetoric Warriors podcast, the author of 21 Colosseums of Persuasion. He has taught persuasion theory in college for 20 years and now teaches those skills to, as he says it, grown-ups out there trying to get things done in the real world. In addition to this, because that's just not enough, is it? He's also a partner in 500 Rockets. That's a lot of rockets. A full-service creative and digital marketing agency in Austin, Texas. And then there is his career as a longtime professional stand-up comedian. Currently, I think, on cruise ships all over the world. So much fun. We talk about all the things, but especially about ethical persuasion, communication, meta-thinking, using rhetoric for good, being playful, power dynamics, and how important comedy is. Maybe more comedians should rule the world. Enjoy learning and being inspired by Dr. Dan French. All right, smart humans, I am delighted to introduce to you Dan French. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
We're good. Yeah, I love that you're saying that because we have people from 102 countries tuning in.
Oh, wow.
Which is super fun. And we're going to dive straight in with a topic I think a lot of people think about, which is boredom.
Boredom?
Yeah. Do you ever get bored?
I have zero boredom tolerance, zero.
So what happens when you get bored?
I do something. I have my pockets of things that I do in the world, and I do them.
Okay, so tell us a little bit more about that. What do you do in the world?
So the most interesting part of, I think, my brain is that it's diametrically split into intellectual and creative. So I'm right-brained and left-brained. And basically, I work as a comedian, comedy writer, stand-up entertainer. I write all sorts of things. And then I'm also, PhD in rhetoric and intellectual, and I love to dissect things. So basically, the two sides of my brain just talk to each other all day long. This side will think of something, this side will heckle it and turn it into comedy, and it just oscillates.
Beautiful. And so, do you still work as a what is the word, rhetorician? Is that
yeah, rhetorician? Everybody wants to add a T. They always say rhetorician.
See, I have like this classical background. That's like super helpful.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So yes, I combine careers. I've always had multiple careers that are going at the same time.
How do you do that? I mean, I think a lot of people listening are wondering, how does someone do that? Like, if I want to be in academia, how the hell do I find time to do other things? Because I have to publish or perish and so on and so forth.
Well, I didn't say I did each of them well, you know.
See, this is great. Like, yeah, but kill the perfectionism, basically.
Well, I was a professor for off and on for 20 years, and I like teaching, but I'm not really an academic. Like, talk about boredom. Like, I find academic work too tedious, too detailed, too long term, too boring. The same way, like in creative, I don't really like to write screenplays or really even television, scripts, because they're long form. Yeah. And I'm not a long form person. It is torture for me, not completely torture, but I have to really force myself to stay on one project in a mono way over time. I can bounce back and forth between big projects, but just doing the same one every day just drives me nuts. So I wasn't a good academic. I'm a decent intellectual, but not a good academic.
Right. Fair enough. And what about the comedy? How did that start?
Boredom. Like, I think
again, right? Like,
I tend to drive towards things that have energy in them. Even if I don't really quite fit, just so I can see what's there. And with stand-up, my first professor job, was a instructor job after I got my master's degree, was right near a comedy club that was just opening up. Wow. And so I went down there to check it out and ended up going up on stage the next night.
Seriously, you checked it out and the next day you got on stage. You're just like, let's give this a whirl and see what happens.
I wanted to see what it felt like.
And what did it feel like?
Amazing. I mean, the performance energy inside of that sort of glowing orb of a spotlight. And in a stand-up club, it's very small, it's intimate. There's probably 200 people that night, the first night I went up. And you're raised up above them. You're the only illuminated being. You're really the only one talking. And you've got a super technology audio that you're talking into. So you feel like a supernatural being.
It's a lot of power.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And back then on that first day, were you like, okay, this is my thing, I have found, right? Did you see the light, or was it just like, oh, this could be fun,
No, I knew instantly. Like, I'll be doing this the rest of my life. And I have.
Oh, wow, really?
23, and I just turned 60, so I've been doing stand-up for 37 years.
That is amazing. Oh my God. And did you ever have a feeling of like, oh my God, the audience, they really don't like this, I want to die and puke now? Or do you feel very comfortable on the stage?
There are bad audiences, or there are audiences you don't fit with, and that kind of stuff. But I've always been very comfortable public speaking. That's why I like teaching and doing talks, and I've done tons of training and things like that. There's something about having a conversation with a crowd of human beings that doesn't let you get bored, because somebody in that crowd will have something interesting to say. So, like, teaching 200 students is awesome. It's much more interesting than, finding one person, you're lucky if you have a bunch of nodes that connect and it's a fun conversation. But talking to 200 people, you'll always have a good conversation.
100%. And listen, I love to teach. I wish I still did it more often, because I learned so much through teaching, right? The questions people ask are like, I love that you're asking that. That is so good.
And it's just so dynamic. My brain works really well in that situation. That's why a lot of times in stand-up, I do crowd work instead of routine. So I have jokes I could do, but it's much more fun to talk to people and let my comedy brain react in the moment.
So what does that look like? Is that kind of improv with the audience? Like, I know nothing about stand-up, so educate me.
Yeah, stand-up, stand-up is you kind of mentioned it, but it's a control freak's performance form.
Yeah.
You're in charge of what you're going to talk about, what's going to happen, if you let somebody talk, that's your choice, or you can shut them down. But there's negative crowd work where you have to insult somebody into submission. But I do positive crowd work. I just want to find out things about people.
Right.
And people are always just weird. They just say weird stuff, and it's very entertaining.
And then you just ride with that, and you sort of improvise on that.
Well, I'll give you an example. This last cruise that I just did through Alaska was a 10-day cruise in Alaska.
Okay, I'm going to pause you there, right? Because that's another, like, such a fun thing. Like, yes, you keep it interesting by doing lots of different things, but then within one of the different things that you do, you go on cruises all over the world. How fun is that? Okay, so you were on a cruise.
I was on a cruise, which, if you don't understand, like, cruises hire entertainment, and some of it's like on-ship entertainment, which will stay there for 3 or 4 months, like a Broadway show, and they just do the same show every week. But then they bring in new entertainers every week as well, and that's usually a lot of times stand-up comics or vocalists or singers or whatever, or musicians. But I get flown in basically for a week at a time. Sometimes they'll keep me for 2 or 3 weeks because they keep changing out people. And I do maybe 2 nights, 2 shows each week, of 45 minutes of straight stand-up with about 800 to 1,000 people.
Super fun.
Because they're really big theaters. And yeah, it's crazy. It's people all over the world, all over the US. I've been to Sri Lanka. I've done the coast of Brazil. I've done Hawaii multiple times. I'm doing Tahiti coming up.
I think there are many people listening right now taking notes, like how the hell do I get on a cruise ship? But
all you need is two 45-minute completely different shows of plain material.
Amazing. Okay, but you were going to tell us the story about what happened when you interacted with the audience.
So this last week, there are lots of ways of doing crowd work. Like, I also do trainings, and like the comedy trainings are really interesting, especially for like business people. Essentially, it's extracting the secrets and techniques that professional stand-ups have used, but moving them over to let professionals use them, not to be funny, but to like dominate an audience or rivet an audience. And crowd work's one of the great ones of doing that. So there's sub techniques within it that you can use to make it work. And one of them is, I need personal information from people in order to turn it into comedy. And so I'll ask questions, and the most common way of doing crowd work, most common topic, is, where are you from? And as soon as they say where they're from, you have all this imported, caricature of that area. Like, where are you from originally?
I'm from Haarlem in the Netherlands.
Yeah, see, you just said Harlem from the Netherlands. That's a weird concept here in the US, right?
It's Harlem with an extra A.
That's funny.
And I think Harlem was actually named after it.
Really?
Yeah, because remember, we used to own New York, but then we sold it for one guilder. Idiots that we were.
You could have just had better defenses against British ships and cannonballs.
Yeah.
So I would take that. That'd be perfect. Like, if I found you in the audience, I'd be like, what's your name? And that's where it would start. And then, where are you from? And you would say Harlem, the Netherlands. I'm like, really? That's the whitest place ever, and like the most African-American place in America. Like, that's some weird collision. Yeah. And we'd be off and running.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, you just riff on that.
Right. But the guy that I was talking to on the cruise this last time, I asked people, do you like where you're from? Who loves where they're from? And a bunch of people applaud. I'm like, okay, everybody just yell out where you're from. And I listened for funny places. And this guy was from Arkansas, and he had a big accent. And I'm like, okay, Arkansas, what's your name? And he said, my name's Country.
What?
Really?
That is like such a gift.
Here we are.
You can't make this shit up. Seriously.
No, so there's a whole series of probe questions that you can use to get more. And he's got a woman sitting next to him. I'm like, well, who's next to you? He said, well, that's my wife, but I call her sister.
What?
And I'm like,
Country with a sister from Arkansas.
Right? So
Stop it.
That's crowd work. And I talked to him probably 10 times. I kept coming back to him if the show would lull or I would get bored. I'd be like, hey, country, how you doing?
As your sister.
But that's really
Listen,
just all technique. You can learn how to do that. Everybody's like, it's fast and it looks magical because you're doing it in the moment, but it's really technique.
I love this. And one of the reasons I also love it is a lot of my clients hate networking events. And this is actually super useful for networking as well. Right?
Yeah, network's really interesting too. Like, so for people who don't understand what rhetoric is in my background, like rhetoric is a communication studies degree. So it focuses on persuasion or like messaging or communications directed towards getting specific effects. Like rhetoric is the study of effective messaging.
Yeah.
Like over here, people just express, they're human, they communicate. In rhetoric, you work.
Oh, I've lost sound. I've just lost you, Dan. You're back.
Okay.
You were saying rhetoric is basically effective messaging.
Rhetorical studies is the study of effective messaging. So expressive, most people speak expressively. Whatever their brain comes up with, they say it. Rhetoricians stop you before the message gets out, do work on it to optimize it for whoever you're talking to so it has a better chance of being successful.
Yeah.
So it's very organized, very edited, very controlled messaging.
And it, by the way, has a very bad name. We're going to talk about that later on, but it can also be used as a force for good.
Yeah. So, I mean, the reason why people think it's bad, rhetoric is just the old Greek word for persuasion. But the only time it gets used anymore is in political rhetoric, like empty rhetoric, you know, saber rattling.
Or selling you stuff you don't want or need, right, in marketing.
Yeah, and so that's what everybody thinks about persuasion is it goes up instantly into sales and bad politics, but that's like 20% of persuasion. Yeah. The other 80% is ethical, good techniques for getting human beings to do what you want them to do or need them to do.
Yeah. Okay, so going back to networking, sorry for the
so
the segue. Yeah.
Like a communication studies degree, the thing I like about rhetoric is they'll dive into anything. And it studies like what are people doing here? What are the best techniques? And then goes back and teaches those techniques to people. So like I used to do these events. I'll do them here again in California. I did these a lot when I lived in Texas. I had a big house. I would take everybody I met, new people I met for the last 6 months, and comedians, business people, intellectuals, professors, whatever, and do parties that I would call super social parties. And I would do bios before everybody before the party. I would write up a bio and put it and send it out to everybody. So you knew exactly who everybody was, even though they were all strangers. Mm-hmm. And there were rules for the party. There were networking rules. Like you had to talk to everybody.
So you kind of gamified it.
Yeah, I gamified it and I gave it new social rules because the worst part of networking is you don't know who you're about to talk to.
Yes. So fix that.
There are ways to optimize it.
Yeah. Love it. So any specific tips for people who find themselves like maybe for work, they have to go to a conference and they find themselves in a room full of people and they're like, oh my God, I hate this. Like, how could they make it fun? What would be a fun game to play?
Well, again, I think it's a communication challenge more than an introversion challenge. Like a lot of people are like, I'm an introvert. I don't like to talk to new people. I'm like, that's not true. You don't like to talk to new people that you don't enjoy talking to.
Exactly.
But if you knew who you were going to enjoy talking to in that room, you'd be very excited to go into that room.
Yep.
And part of it is just being able to identify you. And I came up with this partly because I was a panelist for years at the Austin Film Festival.
Oh, fun.
And they literally print out a brochure or a magazine or a guide before the event to tell you who everybody is. Because everybody wants to network.
Yes.
Because they're all writers trying to meet producers and more advanced writers. So I would go through the thing before the event and mark all the people I wanted to meet. I knew who they were, so I'd just walk up to them and start talking to them. So you can do it that way. Somebody can put together that resource or wear something to let people know who you are. like a t-shirt or something, so
basically message with your outfit, you're saying.
Well, or actual signage.
Yep.
I had a guy who was a fight coordinator, and he would go to the Austin Film Festival, and same thing. He wasn't good at just walking up to people. So I'm like, well, print up a t-shirt that says, I fight people for a living.
Oh, that is good.
And so everybody would ask him, well, what's that mean?
Yeah.
And
yeah. It's a nice little bit of intrigue, right?
Yeah. Advertising. You got to advertise yourself.
Yeah. 100%. Okay. And listen, when we talk about rhetoric and conversations, when it comes to the business world, another thing a lot of people struggle with is, I think, sort of expressing frustration or disagreeing, right? I think a lot of people have trouble doing that, because they think, oh, I can't say I don't like this. And then it sort of builds up and it becomes so much that they then explode because there's now so much they don't like, right? So basically first there's all the people pleasing and then there's the eruption. Have you got any tips on like how to navigate disagreements and sort of giving feedback that is maybe not so positive? Like, and please don't say the sandwich method.
Don't say what?
The sandwich method. Start with something good and then no.
Well, that's all the little tiny pieces of rhetorical advice that leak into the world. That's the thing I like about rhetoric. It's people have never even heard the term used the way it's supposed to be used. It's a 2,500 year treasure trough of ideas about persuasion. Right. It starts all the way back with the sophists and Aristotle and up to the current minute. So every once in a while, one will leak out like that, like give people, feedback with the sandwich method of positive, negative, positive. It's like, okay, that's a tiny little technique that has some utility to it. But the bigger issue is, how do you validate people or not intimidate people or not upset people? And there would be 50 techniques for that, but the one that people remember is sandwich because it's a better message about how to do it. It's easy to remember.
Yes.
Rhetoric will be like, okay, great, sandwich, that's sitting over here. Let's do the other 50. So that you have a lot more options, because people recognize sandwich, they recognize what you're doing. Exactly.
You're like, oh God, this is where they do the sandwich. No, just give me the bad news. So can you give us a tip, like for, let's say, my COO has decided like we're pivoting or we're taking a new direction and I know this is going to hurt my team and I am not happy and I'm going to have to like push back. Like what can I do to not, like, my brain is like, oh my God, confrontation, fear, don't like it. From a neuroscience perspective, it's going to be very uncomfortable. Also, I want to, keep a healthy relationship. I don't want to burn my bridges, but I also want to express my discontent. Let's put it that way, right?
Your winter of discontent. So again, rhetoric is something that's going to answer that question by studying that. Right? It's not going to give you pre-built tactics.
Yeah.
So if you look at down on this sort of list of levels, like here's theory, strategy, tactics, situationals, and then here's actual scripts for how to do that. So if we go down that list, like what I would start with is probably a strategy, which is to meta everything.
Yes. I love metaing everything anyway, because it's so useful.
Right. That's what smart people do.
Yes,
they turn everything into an abstract issue and they go to the meta level.
Yes.
So what you have to be able to do is invite that person up to the meta level with you, which doesn't have emotion in it. It doesn't put the relationship on, where it could be injured. It takes relationship and emotion out of it. It's like, we're just going to abstract this. And if you can get somebody up there, get them out of their emotionality, out of the relationship. It's like, let's just look at this problem or this thing that you have suggested in an abstract meta way. I understand why you're doing it. You can do validation stuff, which is interpersonally.
Yep.
Which is basically interpersonal persuasion techniques.
But listen, let's emphasize this, because I think a lot of people don't realize this, right? But it's so insanely helpful to say, listen, I see where you're coming from. Just that one thing, right? I get it. I get it. And
Right.
Yeah.
So you do a little relational work with your interpersonal techniques of validation and, acknowledgement and all those things that people like as human beings. But then you have to move them up into the meta.
Yeah.
And not everybody wants to go up there. Not everybody
Yeah.
can go up there. They don't really review their decisions. They don't really look at the rationality or that long-term consequences or the, wide consequences of what they're doing.
Which is exactly what can be so frustrating. Yes.
It's very frustrating. For smart people, these are the existential frustrations of life.
100%.
You can't get people to meta with you.
Yeah. I love that you're saying, okay, this is only going to be a quote. You can't get people to meta with you. It's like we need a title
Hey,
or
let's
something.
meta.
Yeah. That's meta, baby. Yeah.
Because as well as I do, and again, anybody that likes to learn, the meta is where you solve everything.
Yes. Like
got
long term, right? Like, no, it's not like, okay, there's a dike, there's a hole in the dike, let's put my finger in. That is not a long-term solution, people. Right. Yeah.
So the question becomes, as a rhetorical challenge, how do I get people into the meta sphere without, even if they don't want to go there? Or
Yeah,
if they
and
don't know
without
what
making
I'm
them
doing.
feel like threatened or inferior in any way, right? Or vulnerable. Yeah.
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 You can't lose your mind and be like, you're just an idiot.
Exactly,
What
right?
that
Are
is
you
basically saying is, I
stupid?
can't get you into the meta. I cannot get you to where I need you so we can solve this.
Yeah.
That's your fault. That's not their fault. You just don't have the right techniques to get them there.
Amen. So everybody needs to learn rhetoric, basically, at least part of it.
Useful. It's so useful to be able to design your interactions to optimize them to get what you want.
Yeah. So, okay, so let's talk to the ethics of that, because if I get what I want, maybe somebody else doesn't.
Yeah, there's all sorts of potential outcomes. So I teach ethical only persuasion.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Tell me more.
That's my thing. I don't like to use unethical techniques. And partly because of the morality of it, and partly because of the pragmatics of it. Whenever you do an unethical technique to win in persuasion, you are also losing in ways you don't need to lose. Because if somebody gets moved somewhere through unethical persuasion, you've injured that relationship in the future.
Yeah.
So you have now
this is again the
lost in the
long-term
future.
vision. Yeah.
And that's not acceptable to a rhetorician. I'm here to win in the moment and in long term.
Yeah.
And the big win is we have a great relationship now. We can talk.
Yeah. And there's
going to be more problems. There's going to be more things I need from you.
Yeah.
And so that's the ultimate goal in really good rhetoric, ethical rhetoric, is to create a great relationship, which only works if both sides are winning.
I love this. Okay, so people in business pay attention, right? Because I see so many, especially in the coaching world, like, and also marketing, by the way, people with like short term, let's push a product, let's create lots of FOMO, sell lots of shit. But then people, are never going to trust you again. And you'll have to find new people to sell shit to. And like at some stage, surprise, surprise, you're going to run out of people.
So. Yeah, business is a weird environment. Like I worked in academics and I worked in entertainment. In the last 10 years or so, I've done a lot in business as well. I have a marketing agency out of Austin, and
of course you do. All right, so that's another thing that helps you not be bored. You run a marketing agency, okay?
Yeah, which has an attached marketing think tank to it.
How fun!
Because that's what I really do. I'm not really good at servicing other people's visions, like, because I get bored.
Yeah.
I like to do the creative parts. Like I'm really good at naming and slogans and the kind of high kinetic kind of diamonds that you need in your messaging because they're fast.
Yeah.
Same way joke writing is fast. But in marketing business, I've learned a lot about how business needs to function or how it dysfunctions, whether it should or not.
Yeah.
And you can't change business. You have to adjust your stuff so that they can still be useful within business contexts. Like when I first started, I'm like, y'all need to slow down. Let's really study this. I'm like, yeah, we don't slow down.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not business.
It's interesting. And there is some stuff that you may want to change as well, right? There's some, business practices that some of us are like, this is just ridiculous. Let's just not do it anymore. Okay.
But then you're always a salmon swimming upstream in business trying to get them to change.
Yeah.
Like you can change a little bit, and
Yes.
I admire people. I've got a lot of friends who work in business consulting, and some of them are really interesting mismatches.
Yeah.
Like I have a great friend who's hugely spiritual. She does Reiki and she does every spiritual modality. She's really good at it, but she sells that in business, which is it's a weird market. But they gain from it. Like it sounds like what you're doing with teaching people, to avoid boredom and to, incorporate
100%.
these principles into their business. It's a tough sell at first, but once they get in, they're like, oh, there's value here, even for business people.
It's not even a tough sell. They're like, oh my God, you are a smart person. You get my brain. Hallelujah. Where have you been all my life? That is usually how it goes. So I have a relatively easy, I think. Yeah. 100%.
Interesting. Yeah. There are a lot of intellectuals in business, right? Who are making a living and they're doing their thing in business, but they are kind of starved.
Yes.
For really using intellectualism in business.
Exactly, right. When they may even have had coaches in the past, but they were just running around circles and kind of manipulating them, probably also with rhetoric. By the way, right?
Yeah, everybody uses rhetoric.
Yes. Yeah. And then they encounter someone who's like, no, that shit's not gonna fly here. They're like, oh, this is fun. Right. This is a new kind of challenge. So yeah, that is fun. I just want to go back actually to stand up and another concept which I think would be super fun to talk about with you, which is rejection. Like, do you even experience, because it sounds like you don't even experience rejection in a way. There's just like a mismatching audience, is I think what you said.
And that's all it is. Like, again, once you've done something so much and you know all the success techniques in it, the only way you're going to fail is if you're like, having some night where you can't use those techniques very well or mismatch. And so, like in stand-up, it's just fascinating. Every time you go through it, you learn new techniques for making the audience like you, to keep the audience psychologically in the moment. And you've already got pre-written superscript. Like I have jokes that I still use that I wrote 30 years ago.
Wow.
Because they work no matter what. I call them infallible jokes. They're just whatever reason you constructed it correctly. It had really good power and it just works forever.
Yeah. Which
is a great way to start. That's why everybody's always intimidated. Like, what if they're not laughing? I'm like, well, that's their fault.
But again, right, this attitude.
1,000 times.
But you're kind of brushing this off like this is a normal thing. I mean, I applaud you for it, but I think for so many people it is not, right? They will, instead of thinking, okay, it's an audience mismatch, they will rather like turn against themselves and say, oh my God, I suck, or I failed, or this went wrong. So what is happening in your brain, or what do you think makes you have such a different reaction and such a different attitude?
It's the repetition of that profession.
So it's mastery, so kind of.
You've done it. I've done stand-up in everything from biker bars in Florida, where it's an aggressive audience and they're not there to listen to you, to give you any power. You have to take it. All the way up to corporate boardrooms, or really great nights in comedy clubs when everybody is there happy and juiced and ready, and just I've done it everywhere. Right. And so it's only now, and I still fail. There's still failure in stand-up. Like doing the cruise ships. I only started doing those about a year ago. And I've done some of those that have failed, horribly. Partly because I hadn't done stand-up for real for about 7 years. I transitioned into mostly doing comedy writing and then working in business. And so my techniques were rusty. I was not, sharp. But my first ship that I did was mostly British.
Ah, interesting.
And it was a mismatch. They just did not like my Americanness. I could not get them to connect with me and talk.
Yeah, like engaging a British audience and audience participation is very different.
Very different. And
Yes.
I'd never done that audience before. So
Yeah.
completely took me by
Interesting.
surprise. I was not rhetorically prepared with techniques for working with that audience. And so it was bad. That was a horrible night, which amused me, because I'm
So
like,
how did it amuse you? So what happens in your brain? Do you go like, oh, this is interesting, or wow, right? Yeah.
that's where the intellectual pops in. Standing back and looking at it. It's like
Yes.
start analyzing, oh, here's all the reasons why that failed. Here are the ways I could succeed if I did that again, but I haven't worked with another British audience since.
Okay, people, universe, send him a British audience, please.
I don't want to do another British audience. Like
Oh,
I've
come
done
on.
Canadian audiences and they didn't like me either.
So there we are. But listen, what you said there is really important to, I think, emphasize. Curiosity is such a powerful tool, right? Just instead of getting sort of drawn in and starting to feel emotional and that whole spiral of, oh my God, I feel that I sucked, or I disappointed, I let people down, yada, yada, yada. Like, oh, this is interesting. Unhappy audience. Right? That's solve for what happened here, instead of making it mean a shit ton of things about me and my character, or all that kind of stuff, which then turns into a negative spiral pretty quickly. It can turn pretty nasty. Just taking a step back and just doing the analysis
Right.
is so
Well,
useful, right?
yeah, again, it's that double world of emotion and meta.
Yeah.
Like that's my meta brain sort of jumping up and going, yeah, yeah, I'm still a human being. You want to have a weird experience, go ahead and go fail early on a cruise and then cruise with those people for another 6 or 7 days
And go,
and
hi,
walk around the boat. We're all in the same spaces and they're like, I'm walking past and they're like going like, yeah, I don't want to
don't know
talk to
this
this.
guy.
And I would tell them, like, sometimes on shows now, I'll be like, hey, if you don't like the show or if this doesn't go well, you can still talk to me. Like, I'm not going to tell you more jokes to punish you at the buffet.
It's safe to approach me.
But it's a tough psychological space to know
Yeah.
every time you walk out of your cabin, everybody dislikes you.
Yeah.
Or they're not, it's a weird thing because, like, the relationship between entertainers and audience, it's like you've disappointed them. They've now all negatively evaluated you. But I'm like, that's like this much of me. It's a half a
Yes.
percent of what I do. You don't know the rest of the stuff I do. So it's a tough psychological experience of failure. And I have a little presentation I was working on about A Tale of Two Cruises. So the first one I did was the British one, and then
Yeah.
3 weeks later, 2 weeks later, I went to Hawaii to a mostly American thing for 2 weeks, 2 straight weeks, and it crushed. I was a star on the ship. So everywhere I walked, people were like, Dan, and they knew me and they wanted to talk. And I'm like, yeah, exact same show.
Fascinating. So that also shows you how relative it all is. And it's not like an absolute meaning on your performance or your character. It's just context.
Yeah,
Right.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Love that. Talk to me a little bit about, first of all, like your education and maybe a couple of your thoughts on our educational system while we're at it.
Our educational system
Well,
or like
your
universal education
yes.
systems.
Well, let's stick to what we know.
Well, I'm from Kentucky originally, and for people who aren't from the US, just think of the most illiterate place where you live, and that's your Kentucky. Kentucky in America is one of the bottom 5 states in education and healthcare, and that's partly because it's got underdeveloped areas in the mountains, the hillbillies. And I didn't grow up there, but I grew up in a place that didn't really value education. Like it's not a culture; it values action. It's sort of a working class culture, agrarian culture. So it doesn't really value education. But I did because it was my way. I was bored at 5. I knew I was in the wrong
Right.
culture at 5 years old. Like when
Amazing.
you're abridging your vocabulary because your words are too big for the adults. It's
Basically, you
like,
were
oh
dumbing
yeah,
down at 5.
yeah, these are not my people.
Yeah.
And so the only people that were my people were inside of books. And again, most intellectual people have this experience
Yeah.
where it's like, I've got to find stimulation. Well, it turns out books have all the smart stuff.
Yeah.
So I read all the time. And That made me good at school. And school, if you're good at school, you start getting scholarship offers and you actually go to college. And I was the first person in my entire lineage to go to college and graduate college.
Wow. What was that like? Did you get lots of pushback or did they love it for you?
Oh, I have jokes about it in the show about like it definitely estranged me from the rest of my
Yeah.
family. Not all of them. My family's pretty smart, but they're just not educated, formally educated. But they would come up to me after like at family reunions and be like, "You think you're something up there at that college, just all your books, learn everything, but I can still kick your ass right now." I'm like, "Well, that's not really the issue, is it, Aunt Shirley?"
So good.
So I really super value education, and um, when I was about to graduate as an undergrad, I was in an English major and a journalism double major, and I already done some writing professionally, but it was so boring writing within the restrictions of journalism and people telling you what you can and can't say. I couldn't deal with it. So I ended up going to grad school because I couldn't find anything that I thought was interesting to do as a job. And a professor was a friend with, I was friends with, sent me to grad school. And as soon as I walked into grad school at the University of Texas at Austin, I was like, oh, my people,
Mm,
a
so good.
community of thinkers. Like I remember being in the first graduate student party with the professor, the faculty, and going, everybody in this room can understand everything I say.
Isn't that the best?
Crazy. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, where have you people been?
Yeah.
So I was always elevated by education. Some people get knocked down by
Yeah.
education. You know, it's built for them to fail. It's not adapted to them. It's not the way they learn.
Yeah.
But it was perfect for me, and so I just hung around until I got a PhD.
You just stayed long enough until they gave you one.
Kinda. But again, I wasn't a good academic. Like my dissertation was kind of all over the place, and it was sort of interesting, but I wouldn't call it great academics. Had a bunch of interesting ideas in it, but they finally were like, "Yeah, you just go. Just we're done."
It's good. Okay. And then, like, what do you think about the current educational system in the US? What would you love to keep and what do you think needs to go?
I just think it's under intellectualized,
Mhm.
as you are alluding to, for most things, like in business and people's lives. They don't really, for a place that intellectualizes, that manufactures intellectualism and teaches it for a living, they do not intellectualize themselves very well. Like I remember my son, they would have sports day at his grade school,
Mm.
where for one day, you know, out of the year, that all the kids would show up and the whole day was outside playing sports and having competitions and at all these stations, and everybody just adapted the whole school for one day to be an outside experience. And I'm like, that's the one day of the year that the kids are happy. Maybe you
Oh
should
my.
do that as the primary foundation instead of making them sit in a square in little desks and expecting them to be able to learn.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so fascinating how we like, of course, I have so many listeners also who have ADHD who were told who didn't even find out they were smart until maybe they were in their 40s because it was just hammered into them that they were, impossible and stupid because they just couldn't sit still long enough to learn. And the school system just didn't cater to that at all. And they were just made to feel like completely dumb, useless, bad, all the things.
Yeah, it's a processor plant, right?
Yeah.
It's just processing masses of human beings and trying to wash as much information into them as you possibly can, but it's horribly designed. It's horribly ineffective. I would completely shred it and be like, okay, let's just think about this. Say we have 20 styles of learners, like a
Yeah.
kinetic kid who has to move
Yes.
all the time. You can still teach that kid.
Of
You can
course.
teach them math. You can teach them advanced things as long as you're servicing who they are.
Yes.
You know, or super emotional people like who are highly anxious and neurotic and
Yeah.
a lot
Or
of
super
fear, a lot of
sensitive.
suspicion. Then you got to adapt over to that.
Yeah.
But just driving one huge boring bus and making everybody get on it is a horrible idea.
Yeah. And I think it's a problem that is it is hard to solve. I remember when I was in school, I was in Montessori school. And then I went to a non-Montessori school and I was like, okay, when I grow up, I want to fix the school system, right? This is what I was thinking in school. I was like, has to be fixed. This was in the 70s, people, and it's still a complete mess. It is a hard thing to fix because it's very, well, maybe, I mean, that's an assumption, I guess, that it's expensive to cater to all kinds of different people. That is an assumption. Maybe that isn't even true if we get super creative around it.
Yeah, I think if we intellectualized it well and actually put resources into it, then it wouldn't be, it's not a unsolvable problem.
Yeah, I agree.
But the big solution that we've used, at least for the last few hundred years, has been to massify and institutionalize and industrialize.
Yeah, and standardize everything.
Those concepts have worked well for creating things like cars.
Yes.
But they don't work very well. Like even now, if you look what happened to the car industry, it's like, yeah, okay, let's massify it. But then once it matures, it's like, no, people don't want mass product. They want crazy, weird, creative cars.
Yeah.
And so it's forced to change, and there's money in it for if it changes well, and it dies if it doesn't change.
Yeah.
Education just keeps going no matter whether it's bad or not.
That's the other thing, right? There's always going to be kids. There always need to be schools because that's the way the kind of society operates. And there's very little punishment if you don't get it right, other than, well, we're looking at it right now, I guess. But like, what happens in society?
Yeah, what are we going to do? They're going to, oh, we got to change it all. These two people on the podcast.
Hey, we got to start somewhere. Okay, so the next thing I'd love to talk about is play. So how does play enter into your world, because it's such a good antidote to boredom? Do you feel like you're playing when you're doing stand-up, when you work?
Yeah, so I have to be multimodal all the time. I can't take creativity out of my constant experience.
Right, you can't shut it off, basically.
I can't shut it off, and most people can't. Like, I have all these sort of sub things that pop up all the time, and I always save them. Like, because I'm a comedy writer and an intellectual, I obsessively save everything in a place I can go find it again. And I've got this massive list of ideas of things that make life more interesting that we should put into the world. And like one is comedians should be given way more power.
Right.
Like comedians, everyday comedians, not just professional comedians.
Yeah.
There's a big swath of the world which is comic. And that's one of the foundations of their persona and their psyche and their orientation to the world. But it is the most oppressed group. You are not allowed to be the comedian in most business situations.
Yes.
In most organizational, formal situations.
Yeah, because you have to be serious.
Yeah, because the serious decided that they dominate the world, and the comedians are not allowed to have as much power. So one of my little political sub projects is to get comedians more into power.
I love it. This is your personal revolution, right? Like,
yes, because we are oppressed. We get fired if we say our comic thoughts. We get attacked because like you're wasting time or you're in the way. So all that comedy creativity and joy and playfulness and happiness that it engenders is moved down to this tiny little layer of after the meeting, or go find somebody in their office and you can talk to them about and joke around, but you can't do it in public because you get fired.
Yeah, it is fascinating but this also ties into our insane obsession with productivity, right? That everything we do needs to be productive in some way, which is just makes people very depressed. And it also shows up in like arts. Like I used to teach creativity and people be like, oh, but what I've just created is that, could I do something with it? Could I sell it? Like, or at least that would be like this hidden agenda in the back of their mind instead of just being in flow and experiencing the joy of playing with paint or taking pictures, right? There's always this like, oh, can I show this on Instagram? Can I commodify it? Can I monetize it? Like, it's so utterly depressing.
Yeah, capitalism and joy kind of don't really.
They don't mesh well, do they? I mean, joy and humor, of course, is often very subversive, which is another reason. Like, if you like capitalism and you also like hierarchies, you're not going to like stand up, right? Because
Well,
it's
it's not, I would say it's not really subversive, it's lateral. Like what
interesting.
comedy wants is everybody to have the same level of power and be able to talk and things like that. And yes, like comedy will go after whatever's in power, because whatever's in power doesn't want to give the power to comedy. So it has to compete. There's a great Russian theorist, literary theorist named Mikhail Bakhtin, who talks about the second voice, that there's a dominant voice in every culture, in every situation, but then there's a second voice. There are other voices going on. There's usually inside of other people's heads. They don't get to be released. And with comedy, it's always like whatever you say, the comic will use all these techniques to have an alternative version of what you just said, or a reaction to what you just said. But it's just not allowed to, dominate the room.
It's like kind of the undercurrent of what's going on, and you actually get to speak that.
Yeah, that's the nice thing again about stand-up. It completely inverts that. Oh, the fool, the jester, the comedian is now in power.
Yep.
Come on into the room. You're going to deal with the comedian for an hour.
Yeah. I love that. It is actually a beautiful reversal. And it's also a space. I also used to do a lot of facilitation. And of course, a lot of stuff that happens when you work with groups is around power, like in power dynamics. And do people feel safe to even try stuff? But also when they enter a room where there's going to be stand-up, basically they're handing over power, right? All their status is gone. They can't sort of say, well, but I am the senior blah, blah, right? You're just another human sitting in a chair, maybe getting picked upon, maybe not, but you can't sort of defend yourself by saying, but I put a lot of weight over here.
Yeah. There are different rules operating in comedian space. And you have to, either accept those rules or challenge those rules. And that's the heckler, will challenge the rule about who gets to talk. And, I get every once in a while somebody, it's not heckling like attacking usually, it's just disrupting. Like they want to say something, or they're drunk and it just comes out of their brain and they're suddenly wanting to be in the space with a voice.
Yeah.
And I'm always like, even sometimes they'll say something funny, but I'll be like, well, that was funny. I was like, that's, do you have anything else? Like, do you have more routine? Because I do, and I've got a microphone. So let's play. And I just eviscerate them because I've been doing this. I've been on stage 5,000 times talking to random audiences. Like, there's no way you can compete with me.
Yeah. You're not going to win that game.
But I prefer not to create conflict. I turn every piece of conflict into cooperation. I'm like, you want to talk? Great. Let's see if you're funny. And if you're not, I'm going to invite you to not talk. And if you don't take that invitation, I'm going to make you not talk.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about community. That's another thing on my cards. You just said, like, I found my people when I started doing my master's, right? My graduate thing. What about community with regards to the stand-up community? Is that also, does that feel like your people? Is it a special kind of scene? Do you feel like you belong?
It's definitely a special kind of scene. I was hanging out last night with 3 other comedians who I've known forever. Yeah. And they're all really funny and just interesting people.
I think a lot of neurodivergent people also end up as comedians, right?
Well, I think a lot of neurodivergent people, because they're not always super social, they're attracted to things like comedy, but they can't get themselves out to do it. Like improv communities are interesting for that, because improv, it's a group activity and it's very supportive. It's very tiny cultish, where they help each other and they have all these techniques and they end up doing pretty cool things, but not as really as individuals. Stand-up is exactly the opposite. Stand-ups do not want to play with somebody else. They want to control every bit of it. And like, it takes
autism, right?
Yeah. So I hate doing improv. I can't do it. I don't enjoy it. It feels incredibly oppressive. I'm like, y'all hush for a minute. Let me do this.
I did it once and I got super annoyed. I was like, no, this is not where I wanted this to go. Can you please write like that? Yeah,
which is perfectly fine. I completely applaud it. Go do it if you get stuff out
beautiful.
of it. Great. It's just not my thing.
Yeah, 100%. Now, I just read an autobiography by an autistic stand-up comedian in the UK. I forget her name because I suck with names, but she actually ended up, right? She's like, I love this because this is, with stand-up, I am in control, right? Not someone else. And that is perfect for my kind of brain. And I don't need to be palatable or to mask, right? I just get to say what I think.
Yeah, there's a weird, because I'm a professional stand-up, like that kind of auteur theory of I'm just here to express who I am. And if you guys enjoy it, great. If you don't, you don't. I get that. And
No,
amateur
she's
stand-up.
she's a famous stand-up. She's a professional as well. She's a famous
Right.
stand-up.
I'm just saying, like, there's things within stand-up that have been imported, like from artistic theory, and
Mm-hmm.
then idea of the natural, brain showing you who I really am. That's not really what stand-ups do. Stand-ups adjust to the audience because the
Sure.
audience has forced them to adjust.
Yeah.
Like if you're getting silence from everything you say, you will change.
Yeah.
And it's really stand-up is kind of co-created with the audience. Like they tell you what they like, and you drop the stuff they don't like until they shape you into something that they find really palatable and really affable. So in some ways it's you, but in some ways they're editing everything you say.
Yeah, which I think is beautiful. It's almost like you're creating a statue, right? They're sort of carving, what the actual set is going to be with you. You come with the stone, and together you create a statue. It's not just you saying this is what it's going to be.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's an awesome way to create because you get a tight feedback loop that you never really
Yeah.
get to experience. And even in business, part of the problem with businesses, they're creating products mostly in vacuums. And
Yeah.
they're creating their messaging mostly in vacuums. Then they'll test it at the end. I'm like, that's an awful
It's
idea.
insane.
You don't hit the mark without constantly, oh, look, we found it. But you have to go through 100 iterations with real people
Yeah. Basically, you
before
were
you find out good.
MVPing before MVPing was a thing.
Yeah, that's essentially true.
Which is so good. Like, and the amount of times I have to tell people, like, no, do not create a product and like record 50 hours of video before you have like an audience and sold stuff. And yeah, are sure people are willing to pay for this. It's insane. Yeah, I love that as a metaphor. Actually, I think it could be a great example of like a very, very fast feedback loop, then adjust it the next night, right? It's like immediately update, improve, which I think again is also super fun for fast brain people who get bored very quickly. I mean, we love to iterate. We don't
Right.
want committee meetings like, okay, so what are we going to be doing 2025? Right. Tomorrow it's going to be better. We're going to change ABCD, get feedback next.
Well, and you'll find again, I think one of the fascinating things that I've been able to do back and forth between these different worlds I work in is I constantly poach from the other world and bring it over into this world. And like what you're doing with creativity and business, I do with sort of entertainment. And like I worked in Hollywood for a long time. And Hollywood production systems are incredibly sophisticated in creating messaging and messaging that is super produced, it's super creative, and it's fast. So like I used to work in talk shows for a long time. And on talk shows, you walk in the morning and there's no show. It's got to be put together in one morning, early afternoon, rehearsed, practiced, vetted, and suddenly it's on the air that night. An hour of, fresh comedy and entertainment.
Yeah, relevant, right, to what happened that week. Yep.
And so they cannot abide any kind of failure, any kind of dysfunction. It's all been cleaned out of the system.
Yeah.
Because anything doesn't work, they get rid of it instantly, replace it until they find what works.
Yeah.
And so it's super effective in creating these really high level messages incredibly fast. But it does that because it's got all these structures that have been learned over time, over the last 100 years of, creating filmed and videoed and TV entertainment. And then they just travel from show to show, but they all use the same techniques. I walked into business and I'm like, okay, so how you guys, I'm looking at the way they build messaging and it's ridiculously set up.
Yeah.
Let's brainstorm. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that with
Please,
you.
let's not brainstorm. Yeah.
Because you aren't capable, you are not pros, you're not talent, you haven't been trained how to do this, you're executives, you're not even creatives. Why would we brainstorm? You're just going to be in the way.
So
Hollywood
good.
would never do that.
Yeah.
It would never let an executive into a creative process.
So how do people take that?
Well, again, you have to meta it. And I usually start,
yeah.
When I do consulting, I usually start with, hey, great to be here. Like I'll talk to the C-suite people where I'm like, awesome to be hired by this person. Let me orient you to how I do things. You're all super smart. I get it. But you all have SPS, and that is smart people syndrome. Mm-hmm. Which means your brain can intellectualize this, and you're usually fast processors because you have to be in order to, be.
You can do all the analytical stuff. Yeah.
You can move through things great. That does not make any of you creatives. You can understand creativity. It doesn't mean you are not creative, but you're not professional creatives. I can bring in 3 idiots right now to this room who would never say an intellectual thing, but they're so good with language and images and stories and ideas and characters. They'll say things you'll be like, oh my God, where'd that come from? And it'll blow the space open. And that's what you need if you're looking for really kinetic message development. The rest of you guys are in the way. You're stopping those people. You're hampering them and slowing it down. So let me move all you smart people to where you do good things.
Right.
And so just work with the creator.
You're so good at this, right? You get to stand
there. I have to convince them, like, you're ruining your own messaging by being in the room.
So listen, what fascinates me is like the sort of also the economics behind this. And I'm sure people are wondering like, okay, I mean, Dan sounds so good, but how do you live, right? How do you either you run a business and that's supposed to like take up a lot of time, or you do stand up on cruises, but then how do you eat?
Well, my business, I have a partner who's a business guy. Like we've worked together now for 5 years in this agency. Hardcore business guy, has a big sales background, has an MBA. So he runs the business side of the business. Perfect. I could not do that. I could not deal with business. And then I'm kind of the weird wizard that he brings into things and drops in there as sort of like special ingredient. Like, well, we need to bring Dan into this because he's going to design your marketing from a rhetoric history of rhetoric perspective. I'm gonna Greekify your marketing.
So good. Let's Aristotle it.
Yeah, we're gonna bring in from Aristotle into this boardroom and see what he says.
Yeah.
So that only works because I have a business partner, and I recognize that really early because I find the business processes themselves to be incredibly boring.
Again, right? The boredom. Yep.
I don't do the things that bore me.
Yeah, I think that is such a great way to live. Seriously, if you're looking for like a guidance system or like how do I decide if it's boring, you probably don't want to do it.
I can't. I literally have such a strong intolerance to boredom, and I usually have like an hour and a half limit, like on creativity. Yeah. I'll be like after like an hour and 15 minutes or whatever, somebody will be like, "Well, let's keep grinding on this." I'm like, "Nope, I'm at my limit. I'm done. We can come back later or tomorrow or something, and I'll have fresh battery again." But I don't push past battery.
Oh, interesting.
It's useless. I'm not good.
Yeah, nothing's going to happen after that. So do you have any rituals or any like ways in which you set yourself up for whether it's creative success or just to organize your day?
Yeah, tons of them. I'm very patterned usually in most of my days. I will bounce over to work out for 2 hours in the mornings, and I keep working. I have my phone and I take notes and I think.
Your brain is still,
yeah, because it's fun.
Yeah,
like I enjoy that stuff. I don't care about just being entertained or like listening to music or just looking at beautiful things. I want to think about them. Yeah. And as a comedy writer who sells comedy to people and works the comedy minds for a living, my brain's always coming up with crazy little things, and I always write them down because I know they have value and I can make money with those. Drives people in your normal life a little crazy that you're suddenly taking a note on something they just said. but it's
Hey,
what I do.
yeah. So you get up, you work out, you do your ideation sort of on the fly. What else?
I just know that I've got pockets of battery during the day,
Uh-huh.
and I can do intellectualism for a little while, and then I'll reach my saturation limit. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do jokes now.
Right. So you kind of batch different activities and then you know when you need to switch to
Yeah,
feel good again.
definitely patchwork my day
Yep.
between creative, intellectual, and interaction. Like
Yeah.
I like interaction, but it wears me out. So this will be the only. I have to record working on some courses for the marketing think tank right now, and we're going to record a session later where we're going to build an entire business and its marketing in an hour.
Oh, how fun.
Because my partner's really techie, so he's really into AI and Chat GPT,
Yeah.
what it can do. And it's this crazy, I'd say it gets like 80% of basic communication really well dialed in. It
Mm.
doesn't do the top 20% super creative, but in between us, we can take one thing, and he's using Chat GPT to fill in most of it, which takes away most of my boring work because I hate
Yeah.
doing boring
Yeah.
basic communication. And then I can drop in the diamonds that make the communication really interesting,
Yeah.
and we're done. And it's
I
really
think
fascinating.
Chat GPT for creatives is like manna from heaven because we can outsource all the boring stuff and just do the fun shit. It's so cool. And
Yeah.
we can become experts in a couple of hours, like in topics that are, oh, this is interesting. Let me learn about the history of ladders, right? Or whatever it is. So, okay. And you can just instantly learn everything you need to know and then riff on that. Super fun.
Well, and that's the cool thing about human beings, right? Everybody's looking at like, oh, dystopian technology is going to replace. I'm like, yeah, but that's not the way human beings deal with anything. We innovate everything that comes to us. And
Yes.
we suddenly find things that were never there. And like that, just what you just said about, oh, yeah, take away the boring creative work, the just taking information and turning into basic communication, which is what most writing is.
Yeah.
But it's dull. It's tech writing. It's just organizing words and concepts. But suddenly now I've got all this free time to be like, well, what's the craziest image I could throw in there with this text? And yeah, so I find it pretty awesome.
It's going to be a fun ride, I think, for a lot of us. One more question, and actually maybe two. First one, like the dark side of rhetoric, right? And the abuse. I know you, I don't know if you're still doing that, but when we met, it's now like probably 2 years ago, you were trying to convert conservatives.
Hmm?
Is that still, do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, again, for people that have, like you said, fast and wide-ranging brains, rhetoric is
Yeah.
a great area because everybody talks in every field, in every industry, in every part of human life, which means you can go study how they talk. And as a rhetorician, you can extract again the successful techniques and then teach them to people who you want to be successful. And so I find unethical rhetoricians to be a horrible danger to general human society,
Yeah.
and definitely happiness and shared space and all the things that you would want in sort of the utopian world. And so attacking, or like, one thing is depowering the nefarious rhetoricians. And that's going after, in America, that's going after the GOP and the right and the authoritarian leaning kind of governments, all this kind of stuff, who are using certain techniques to win over certain types of the population. So going after them and trying to completely destroy them, depower them. But there's also the people that have been converted.
Yes.
Which is a massive herd of mostly innocent people who have just absorbed a dark rhetoric.
Yep.
How do you go back and rescue them? How do you retrieve them from that dark wasteland of, bullshit that they've absorbed?
Yep.
And so my podcast, I've got 130 episodes of podcast, my Rhetoric Warriors brand, is about how do you teach the good people much more successful rhetoric techniques, and how do you give people things like that, like specific political tasks. If you have the crazy aunt or mom or grandmother who's gone right wing,
Yeah.
you can't talk to them anymore.
Yeah.
So instead of what everybody does, everybody runs out of technique. And they're like, well, I can't talk to them, so I'll just stop talking to them. It's no fun to talk to them. They're crazy. Like, that's not what a rhetorician does. A rhetorician is like, oh, it's a difficult target. I need new techniques.
This is a challenge. Yes.
Yeah. And so about 3 years ago, I wrote a book called The 21 Colosseums of Persuasion. And it's essentially Aristotle's definition of rhetoric is that a rhetorician is somebody who sees every possible way of persuading, sees the full menu, and plucks the one that's going to work with this target.
Right. It's like you have this toolkit and you know exactly which tool you need to get out and apply in this situation. Yeah.
Yes. And rhetoricians don't care what the tool is. Yeah. I limit the unethical techniques because, again, I think they have fundamental flaw. Yeah. But if somebody's been absorbed by the Borg and, is over in the dark rhetoric, yeah. I have to have techniques for getting them out.
Yeah, we need extraction.
Yeah, methods. Exactly. Extraction technique.
Yep.
And so on the podcast, I interview professional persuaders, I interview academic rhetoricians and extract good techniques. But I also like to have people on who have been, absorbed and do some deprogramming on them.
Amazing.
And there are specific techniques which work, just you haven't been taught them.
So listen, everybody, go check this out. If your uncle or other relatives have joined the dark side, have crossed over, check out Dan's podcast to see how you can reprogram them and make them walk towards the light.
Like I'll give you one quick example. In the book, I talk about, here's the full menu. That's why I call it the 21 Colosseums. If I'm losing here as a rhetorician, I'm just going to move you somewhere else.
Right.
Which is why rhetoricians never lose.
Yeah. There's always another technique.
So many options for persuading you, and I don't care which one's going to work. I'm going to use it. Again, I limit it by ethical techniques. But so everybody uses logos to try to persuade in politics, which is logic and information. Horrible idea with the right. You will lose every time you go there because they're not particularly logical. They've absorbed skewed logic. Their information base is bad. They have misinformation instead of regular information. You can't clean that up.
Yeah.
What works much better with the right is something like mythos. So story. This is why so many of the right are Christian. Christianity is a story.
The Bible, yes.
It's not logical.
Yeah.
You can find logical flaws everywhere. Like I was telling somebody last night when I was hanging out with the comedians. I'm like,
oh, I'm losing sound again. Hang on. I don't want to miss this. Maybe. Okay, internet, stop censoring us. What is going on? Seriously, it doesn't look like it's my internet.
It might be
you're
mine.
back. You're back.
Okay. All right, so we're back.
Yep.
So we're doing the Jesus joke, how illogical Jesus was. If Jesus really wanted to be persuasive and convince the whole world, to follow his belief system, he wouldn't have died like during the crucifixion. He would have been like, oh, this hurts so much. Oh, hit me with another spear. Oh, look, I have a hole in my hand. Let me fix that. Check that. It's gone. Now it's back. The whole thing, oh, you can kill a god with a couple of, thorns and some spears. That's a horrible piece of persuasion.
A really, yeah. That's actually really bad. If God was powerful, why did Jesus die? Yeah. Then it does take a lot of explaining.
Right. So there's tons of illogic in Christianity and every religion. Horrible logic, but incredibly powerful as a story.
Yeah.
So if you want to talk to the right, go in and start doing story work, but don't do it while you're finding illogic in their stories, because that's logos invading mythos. Work within the story to find new characters. Story is things like hero, villain, victim, and stakeholders. That's the machinery underneath stories. So everybody's like, how can they still like Trump? I'm like, he's just acting like a mythical hero.
100%.
Can't you see through that? I'm like, no, that's not what you do with stories.
Yeah.
You don't logically decide, is he a hero? It's like, oh, he's acting like a hero. That's enough for me.
So
And
that
we have
is
to
what
turn
you
him into
then,
a villain.
yeah, exactly. Sort of retell that tale and shift people's perspective. Love that. Okay, so people check it out. One more question. If there was one thing you could change in the world, what would it be?
In the whole world?
Yeah, I'm giving you this superpower to change one thing.
I would, again, make comedians have way more power. Like, I think we should have a comedian every 4 months, every 4 years in America. It should be a comedian as president. Just think how different life would be
It
if
would
you had
be
a
a lot more
comedian in
fun.
power. Way more fun. Would invert everything.
Yeah.
You know, like comedians have ideas that serious people never have. Like I would do like socially, there's all these great social ideas. If you watch stand-ups, they come up with these constantly. Like, how about this? Every 5 years, we reshuffle everybody. Everybody has to move to a new house.
Love
Like
it.
you have to pick somewhere, like everybody has to move to a new house. Like, and you can't take your stuff. You just have to walk into the other house next door, down the block, or, you know, in the Netherlands. So we constantly just reshuffle everybody. And people are like, what? And I'm like, yeah. How different would life be knowing that, yeah, you only own this for 5 years? Your bank account, everything changes every 5 years.
Basically, what I'm taking away from this, which is so fun as well, like, I don't know if you know this, but I have a degree in philosophy. You guys are actually philosophers in action, but you're so much more fun.
Yeah, rhetoric is philosophy adjacent. It's
Yeah.
language philosophy.
Yeah, for sure. But, you know, doing stuff like this and having thought experiments and then actually seeing people's reactions, it's the same, right? In philosophy, you ask great questions to sort of make people question things and sort of see things from a different perspective. But if you add rhetoric to that and great story, right, it's so much more powerful.
Yeah, well, rhetoric is always about lived uses. Like it's not just an abstraction. It's pulling things from the lived culture in the moment. And the one thing I don't like about academic rhetoricians is that they just sit back and study.
Right.
I get
Yeah.
involved.
Yeah.
I'm
It
like,
becomes
I
a
want
dead
to use these
language, right?
things. I want
Yes.
to get in there and mess with the machinery, the real way people are living. And
I
most
think,
academics don't. They do
yeah.
great studies, but they never really get anywhere.
I
Never
think we
does
need
anything.
to make them, right? And I think it's the same with philosophy. I think this is why I love coaching so much. It's like actually applied philosophy, right? I ask people questions that are like, oh, damn, right? It's philosophy
Yeah.
in action. Seriously, it's so good. It's so good.
Well,
So
and I
we
think
need to
that,
start
like
rotating
you
them.
said, like being able to mix real academics and real intellectualism back into the world, isn't that what you would want? Like the best thought processes in your business?
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so now we have two things that you're going to change, right? When you're all powerful.
Oh, endless. I'm a changer. I'm an improver.
Yeah.
Like I think that's partly coming from a working class culture and looking around all the time going, oh, somebody needs to improve this place. Like that's always been my orientation. It's like improve yourself through education and, you know, and that's an ongoing, unending process. Improve, you know, businesses, improve relationships, like improve persuasion. Yeah.
Processes, all the things. This has been so fun. I feel like we could talk for at least another hour. Maybe we will someday.
Sure. I always
Thank
like
you.
to talk.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, super fun. I enjoyed it. Like, and people can they go to Rhetoric Warriors, which is on YouTube. They can go to 500 Rockets, is the name of my marketing agency and marketing think tank, and we're coming out with some education products. So it might be interesting to check that out. But yeah, and find me on Twitter. I'm on Twitter all the time, so you can message me there or follow me there.
Or go on a cruise.
Go on a cruise. Let's go to cruise. Just don't be British.
All right. Thank you so much.